Before we go any further, I want to address this bottom point. There is a lot to CSS. There are tons of properties that you can use at any point. That does not mean you need to know them all at once, that you need to memorize them, that you need to worry about them. It can be intimidating. Compared to HTML, there's just a lot more to know. None of it is terribly complicated, fortunately, but there's just a lot. So just to give you an example, I put together a quick example here. These are all individual properties that have to do with border, the border of an element. So there are different properties to change the color for the entire border, or just the top or the bottom or the left or the right, or to change the rounding, the radius of the corner for the top, the bottom, the left, or the right, to change the width of the border, the style of the border, to change all sorts of things. You can see there's, I don't know, I didn't count these, but probably almost 50, maybe 40 different properties here. You do not need to worry about most of these. They exist, and there might be a time you need one of them, but the beauty of all of this, especially CSS, is that you don't need to hold it all in your head. You can find information when you need it online. Nobody expects you to be a master of every single property. The ones that you use the most, you'll just naturally come to remember, but the ones you don't use, or very frequently use, you'll just look them up. So MDN does have a CSS reference. Where are you? Technologies, CSS, CSS reference. Scroll down. This is a list of all of the CSS properties. So if you need to use a property and you're not sure how it works, for example, if I needed to use, I'll show you something I never remember, which is the gradients here. A conic gradient. I never remember how this works, but MDN explains it. We've got examples. I can see the examples here. I can toggle between them. I can scroll down and read more about how it all works. I probably chose one of the more complicated properties to show you right now. Most of them are even simpler than this, but the documentation is incredibly helpful. So keep that in mind. MDN's a great resource. And the other thing that I do a lot, sometimes you just may not know the property that you need to use. You may not know the name. You may not even know if it exists. So you can Google things. There's lots of guides and tutorials. For example, I might want to make some shadows in CSS, some shadows around text. So I would Google something like CSS shadow, and we'll find a couple different results. Generally, I try and avoid this website, W3 Schools. We've got MDN. So there's something called box shadow. There's something called a drop shadow. So there's all these articles that will explain different things, and there's nothing wrong with consulting them at all. It's just part of being a developer, is doing this research and finding things. So there's also a different type of shadow. We can do a text shadow, which I never remember the syntax for either. We can find it here. There's also these tools that you can use to help you out. So the fact that a tool like this exists, it helps me make a text shadow. I can choose how much I want to shift things up or down. You can see the result here and here. This is going to just spit out CSS that I can copy. The fact that this exists shows you that for a lot of people, they don't remember or they struggle to build these from scratch. There is no shame in researching any of this. Here's a different type of a shadow on an image. Here's a rounded shadow. Here's the text shadow documentation on MDN. Long story short, there's so much to know in CSS, but honestly, you don't need to know most of it. There's so much you could know. And there's a small subset of things that you definitely will know just by using them enough. And the rest you can just access when you need it. So don't feel like this is a huge thing you have to memorize. Please stay calm, light some candles, stack some rocks, smell some lovely flowers. Everything's okay. Just focus on the syntax, the patterns, and being able to access information if you need it, but not cramming it all into your head at once. So let's begin.